On the guest list today, we have 2004 World Series champion, 148-game winner, former All-Star, and current rock star, Bronson Arroyo. Bronson, how we doing today? Welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. I'm doing fantastic.
So I think it's probably pretty well known that you...
Dave, we can't see you. Turn your video on.
You had dabbled in music throughout your entire baseball career, but now that you're retired, man, you're a rock star. So I wanted, as a baseball rep myself, that's what I cover on top of music. That's like my main thing. I want to talk about a little bit about 04. You were a big reason that the Boston Red Sox broke the curse of the Bambino. So what was your favorite part of that season, that magical ride? And were you like the guy in the locker room, in the clubhouse, keeping it loose with the acoustic, or what?
Yeah, I was. I still had an acoustic at that time. I was, I started playing probably in AA around 99 when I was with the Pirates in AA in Altoona, Pennsylvania. But, it was that the guitar actually was a reason why I could kind of crack into some circles that I wouldn't normally get into, because some guys like David Wells or some of the older cats that were running the locker room they were interested in like figuring out how to play the guitar. So it gave me a little bit of a leverage in some of those uncomfortable situations. But on that 04 team, I didn't have the guitar out a lot, man. In 03, when I first got called up, I was in the back room. There wasn't enough room in that locker room. It was such a small place in Fenway before they redid it. And I was kind of tucked away back with Pedro Martinez and Manny Ramirez, almost where the trainers' lockers were. But by the time 04 came, they had expanded the locker room, man. And being in there was just really fun. I mean, it was, I didn't really need the guitar to keep that locker room going, because Kevin Millar and guys like Curtis Laskanik and Derek Lowe and Pedro Martinez, these guys were half lunatics, man. And it was always loose inside that locker room. And I think, probably my favorite part of being on that team was, obviously playing in the playoff run and, getting over the hump with the Yankees and finally winning the World Series, was the crescendo on the whole thing. But honestly, the locker room was just there was so much character in there. And you just knew you had such a good ball club too, to show up to the park every day and to see guys just absolutely, doing bananas things inside the locker room and then go out and immediately just kind of dominate on the field. It was kind of an environment I've never really been around. Usually guys in baseball take it a little bit more serious, but, Millar was kind of the ringleader there, man. And he really kind of set the tone for it really being a circus inside that locker room.
Was there a point of that season when you guys knew that you were kind of unstoppable? I'm a White Sox fan. I've heard Aaron Rowan tell stories. He's like, if we lost a game, we just threw it away because we knew we were going to beat the shit out of whoever we were playing the next day. And if we lost that game, it was the same thing. Like, we knew we were going to win every single game. The only reason we didn't win every game is usually because we were like hungover or something, because we were so loose. But was there like a moment, or was it when when A-Rod slapped that ball out of your hand running down on first base, or was there, you know what I'm getting at? Was there a certain at bat or pitch you made, a strikeout or anything?
I felt like, it was such a tough division because, the American League East was just so beastly at the time. I mean, if you just look at that Yankee lineup, man, you got guys like Jorge Posada, and on our side, guys like Bill Miller. I mean, Billy Miller won the batting title in the 7-hole the year before in 03, right? Like, he just edged out Jeter for that. So, I mean, these lineups from top to bottom were so difficult to get through. At times, it felt like you weren't sure if you were going to make it out of your own division. You know what I mean? Like, we felt confident we were going to win a wild card spot if we didn't beat the Yankees in the division, but you just knew that you were going to clash heads with them in order to get to that World Series. It had happened in 03, and you could just see the handwriting on the wall. I mean, having Curt Schilling come in 04 made us feel like we had that extra piece of the puzzle that we were probably missing from the year before. But at the end of the day, you never really knew you were going to get over the hump. I think in Yankee Stadium, when Johnny Damon goes deep in Game 7, that felt like it was the kind of the stamp on the whole thing. It felt like, okay, I think we're going to get over the hump here. There's probably no coming back from this one, and we're going to get a chance to play in a World Series.
Fast forward to the next year. You guys are playing the White Sox in what was probably the coolest series I've ever watched as a fan, because, I mean, the White Sox had gone to the playoffs in 2000. Prior to that, I think it was 94, the strike year. So I hadn't seen a lot of playoff baseball. Obviously, the Red Sox, there's an expectation that you'll at least, and now it's World Series or bust no matter what year it is, even if, they are in a rebuild. But I want to say thank you guys for 2005, because without that, I would be face down in a ditch somewhere. The only time I've been happy as a sports fan was that year. So thank you for that. Kind of moving on from baseball a little bit. We'll get to the music in just a second. I got one last question. Where did the kind of patented leg kick come from when you were on the mound? Because it always kind of enamored me as a baseball fan.
Yeah, that was something that I didn't realize was so unusual growing up, right? Because back in the 80s, when I was a kid, you didn't watch yourself on film. Nobody was recording yourself. And if you were, your parents were throwing it on a VCR tape and you weren't popping it in to dissect it. So I really didn't realize that my leg kick was kind of unusual until I got to the rookie league with the Pirates, when you started kind of dissecting your mechanics. And that was born out of 1985, 86. I'm living in Key West, Florida, and my parents are Mets fans. So they're watching Dwight Gooden, and, he was a stud from 84 on. And so his high leg kick is just what my childhood mind kind of morphed out of it. But in the end, what wound up happening was I was using my foot in a lot of ways. Like, people probably watch that and they might think it's a little uncomfortable. But for me, because I had loose hamstrings and I was using my foot as like a pendulum to pick my leg up, I wasn't using my hip flexor like most guys do to pick their leg up. And so for me, it was just this very relaxed thing. And when I watched myself back on film, even to this day, it looks like I could throw 10 miles an hour harder to myself even. It's like, you're not really getting after it, but I was getting after it. It was just, that's just the way that I moved on the mound. It felt fluid. It felt very effortless and easy, even though I was kind of getting after it underneath. But the leg was something that kind of helped that tempo, and it just made me feel very comfortable out on the mound.
On that note, comfortability, did you ever have a coach at any point in baseball, rookie ball through your ascension through the minors or in the majors? Did they ever try to get rid of that and make you a cookie cutter type stock right-handed pitcher?
Yeah, it's funny. So I was drafted by a guy named Scott Lovecamp, who's still with the Yankees to this day, and we're still great buds. And, people don't quite understand how a scout relationship is, but I try to say to people, imagine if your next door neighbor, you had been over their house hanging out with their kid your whole life, and all of a sudden he is now your 10th grade geometry teacher, the father. It's this odd thing. So the guy who drafted me, Scott Lovecamp, wound up being my pitching coach in Double-A after I'd already been in the minor leagues for a while. And he was just so, uptight about me being successful that he would pick me apart in a lot of ways, just too often and too much. And to this day, he'll kind of admit that. But there was a time when he said, hey, let's take away the leg kick and see what happens. And we tried it one game. And after about 3 innings, I was so exhausted from my hip flexor not being used to picking up my leg that we kind of ditched it. But, these are the trials and tribulations of being in the minor leagues that people don't really realize, that even on a coaching level, you think these guys have it all buttoned up, but they actually don't. And sometimes they're just trying some things out. And then you look back 20 years later and say, man, what was I doing to that kid?
Bronson, what's up, man? I'm Dante. I'm a Boston guy, so I will thank you for winning, not losing like Dave just did. I don't understand why you think, but
only time I've been happy, like I said.
Okay.
Well, I will say I was happy. The only reason I was happy in 05 is because a lot of people don't know this, but in my little hometown in Florida, little town called Brooksville, Florida, AJ Pierzynski was my catcher when I was 13 years old.
I was going to bring up AJ. I love AJ Pierzynski. He, like Hawk Harrelson says it best. If AJ's on the other team, you hate his guts. If he's on your team, you hate him a little less. He's been on my baseball show a handful of times. I'm trying to get him on right now, actually, because the White Sox are just disgustingly bad. But talk to me about AJ. What was was he always the pest going back to when you were teenagers, or is that something that kind of grew as he, he was I think a second rounder out of high school.
Yeah. No, he was a 3rd round pick, and he was always that guy. I've known him since we were 10. We played against each other 10, 11, and 12, and he was my catcher when we were 13. And AJ was always a guy who, if he was beating you at basketball, he was talking pure trash. And if you were beating him, he was telling you that you were cheating. So he was always the best, I mean, it's just the way it was when you would see something happen on the field at a big league level and they would be all over the news, my hometown boys would just be like, yeah, that's AJ, it's just the way it was. It was the way he was made. It was built into his machine. And it was part of the reason why he was so competitive and so good.
Yeah. He's got I want to say he's 5th all time for hits as a catcher. He had an incredible career as well. You kind of already answered this. So you said you picked up the guitar and was it Double-A?
Double-A, yeah.
Double-A. I was going to ask, because I feel like a lot of athletes are like, oh man, I wish I would have gone the music route. And a lot of musicians are like, oh, I wish I would have gone the sports route. So that wasn't a thing for you. What spurred you picking up a guitar and eventually starting a rock band? The rock band is Bronson Arroyo and the 04. I'm sure that's a testament to the World Series championship, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in those early years in the minor leagues, you have a lot of free time on your hands. And I had been singing like in the shower, in the car just for a couple of years. And it was that Stone Temple Pilots, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains. It was that whole Seattle movement that really kind of perked my ears up as a 15-year-old kid. And so what happened was I was just in the minor leagues, and there's one clubhouse guy in the minor league locker room, which is the guy who puts out the food and cleans your shoes and your spikes and your uniform all night. And he's usually there all day and all night, because by the time you finish washing all the laundry, you turn it around, you got another game. So he had an acoustic guitar back there by his cot where he slept, and I just happened to pick it up one day, and somebody gave me an acoustic guitar the next day. And I just felt like it was something I wanted to try out. But once I started getting the music coming out of my own fingers and having the ability to sing songs on my own with no recording, it almost felt like a magic trick in a lot of ways. And in the early days, it was just something to kind of fill time. But as time grew on, it felt like something almost, close to baseball in a way that you couldn't live without it. It was this buzz, it was this charge, and this grind that you felt like was going to be part of your life for the rest of your life.
How did you learn to play? Did you just, were you, I know you're self-taught, but how did you teach yourself?
Yeah, Marty Schwartz is around in 2004, No.
Yeah, it was just back then, there was enough of the internet to look up some songs on tablature. And I remember the very first song I tried to learn was What's This Life For by Creed. And it's just 4 simple chords, but he plays the bar chords in the verse, or the finger chords in the verse and the bar chords in the chorus. And it took me, better part of a year to even start assembling a song to make it sound like it did on the record. But there was these light bulbs that were going off in my head at times. I can remember I was at my grandmother's house in the Keys when I figured out that a bar G was the same as a regular G, just sounded a bit differently. And then, these light bulbs started going off at different times that you realized you could do things on the guitar that nobody was showing you. And it was just, a maturation process on my own, and really just watching other people play a song, maybe like a bum that you ran into on a street corner in New York, and he play, Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd, and you watch his fingers and go, oh, I think I can piecemeal that together. And it was just this 20-year process of doing that.
I'm not going to lie, like listening to your music now, it's pretty impressive that you really haven't been playing that long, like compared to, some of our co-hosts that aren't here right now who've literally been playing music their whole life. This isn't a knock on them, but you sound pretty fucking good, man, for only playing for, what did you say, 20 years?
Yeah, I picked it up in '99, and it's been a slow process of kind of peeling back an onion, because in a lot of ways it's very similar to performing on a field where you could pitch at AA or AAA and feel very comfortable in the way that the uniform sits on you, and that you're playing with guys that are kind of around your age. And then you all of a sudden get called to the big leagues, and now you're playing in a stadium that is fully surrounded with fans behind you. You've never felt that before. You're on a mound now pitching to a catcher who really doesn't know you. And there's hitters at the plate that you've had posters on your wall your whole life. So, peeling back the onion on the mound to just try to get comfortable enough in your own skin in front of 40,000 people to feel like you could perform at the level you did at AA or AAA, was a little easier because I'd been doing that my whole life. But that was still a hump to get over. And musically, I'm still getting over that hump. I'm grinding now down in my basement trying to find a way to feel comfortable by myself. I can play with a band and I feel comfortable, but having an acoustic guitar, being totally naked with no one else to save you except yourself, is something that I've been working on for the last couple of years. And it's just, it's just this slow process of coming down and woodshedding it, man, and trying to give yourself goosebumps and figuring it out.
That's the perfect segue, because I actually wanted to ask, without going back into the conversation, what was it like going from, no offense to Pittsburgh, going from Pittsburgh to pitching in Fenway, and especially at that time with,
that was when it was a blood feud between New York and Boston.
Yeah, but just like,
what's his name? The Don Zimmer and all that.
Yeah, but I mean, it was also like the peak of the curse. I mean, the few years before that were just like gut-wrenching, heartbreaking. They traded Nomar. I mean, it was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of pressure. What was that, just culture shock being?
Yeah. A little bit, luckily I had enough time at the big league level with the Pirates. I had about a year and a half in over the 8 years that I was in that system. And I've been bouncing up and down for 3 years. So I knew what the big leagues was about, but I didn't know what New England was about. And when you're only with one organization, from the time you're drafted until you get traded like I did, you don't know that there's just another way to kind of like, dice it up. And I mean, just from the workouts and the way that the philosophies of the organization were a lot different. And so when I got into camp with the Red Sox, I felt comfortable enough to perform, but I wasn't comfortable in Fenway Park. And I remember the very first day I got called up from AAA in Pawtucket, nobody knew me from a hole in the wall other than the fact that I had thrown a perfect game the month earlier. And they had heard whispers about that. But I was walking to the bullpen when I first got there, that very first game, and I was just looking around the crowd. And, Fenway is such a monastery that it just captures your imagination without the fact that there was double the amount of people in the stadium at the time than there would have been in Pittsburgh. And Kevin Millar stretching on the line, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Cinderella, we ain't in Pittsburgh no more." And, he could see on my face that I was in a different place. And I remember that night I was warming up. It was my first outing. It's the only save I got in my whole career. I came in behind Pedro to pitch 3 innings against the Mariners to get my first save. And while I was warming up in the bullpen, and as you guys know, in Fenway, the fans are right there next to you. And somebody's screaming at me, "Arroyo, if you don't save this game for Pedro, you're not making it out of the stadium alive." And that I literally was on the mound warming up, and I thought, "Oh man, aren't we at home right now? Like, what is going on?" And the intensity of that field never let you down, man. And it was what was so fun to play in, because it felt like you were in a playoff game every night.
Now, do you chase that little kind of that pressure? Like, so you're retired now, obviously. Like, what's the largest you've played in front of for the band?
Oh, sometimes in Cincinnati, I have played in front of 13,000 here, opening up for somebody like Darius Rucker. I've stood on the stage in front of 40,000 in Fenway playing with Pearl Jam just for a song.
I wanted to ask you about that.
But I think you can be just as nervous on the stage as you can be on the field, for sure.
So obviously, or I don't want to get ahead of myself here. Did you meet Eddie through Theo? Was that how that relationship?
No,
because I know you guys are pretty tight now.
Yeah, Theo already knew Eddie before I did, because Eddie just has a real kind of admiration for the game of baseball in general, and because Theo was such a kind of like almost like a genius in his own way as a young age, taking over an organization like that, and then obviously going to the Cubs. They had this kinship already before I had met Ed, but I felt like I knew Ed because he loved baseball so much and I loved his records so much, but I met him in 2010. I went to a show. We had an off day in Cincinnati, and it was the first time I'd seen Pearl Jam, and I just hung out with him before and after the show for a while. And, I just realized that he, was so purposely intentful about his words and remembering your name and making sure that it was a magic night for you, and then the relationship just kind of grew over time of going to show more and more shows after that.
That's awesome. So it wasn't through the hot stove stuff? Because I remember you used to be on those hot stove bills at Paradise in Boston. We were doing stuff for Barstool at the same time. We were playing like same venues, and I remember those tickets were impossible to get.
Yeah. Those early years of hot stove. I just played hot stove. Not this past year we played it again, and they were kind of having a commemoration of the 2013 Red Sox team. So a bunch of the guys showed up, about 20 of them.
Awesome.
But Eddie had not known, he didn't know about hot stove back then, or at least he had not played it yet. He didn't play it. I first started playing it in 2003. I jumped up. Actually, it was a strange night because I jumped up and played with Jack McDowell's guitar, and I played Black. And then in 2013, I'm at a Pearl Jam show. Eddie dedicates a song to me and Jack McDowell from the stage, and then we end up in the dressing room watching the last 2 outs of the Red Sox win the World Series in 13. And then I tell the story about how, man, do you remember I played your guitar on Eddie's songs for this first hot stove thing? It was like this weird full circle moment. But the hot stove has always been a great event, but that isn't how I met Ed. That's crazy.
So you just put out your first full length album. You had a couple and that it is your first full length album, right?
Yeah, I put out an album called Covering the Bases in 2005, I know that, yeah. But of original material, this is my first one, yeah.
So I've listened to it a handful of times now. The album's called Some Might Say. It is quintessential, just like you said, Seattle grunge. And there aren't a lot of bands, unless you're like legacy acts at this point, like Pearl Jam, that play that kind of music. And it's a breath of fresh air that you're kind of bringing it back a little bit. And I'll be completely honest, when we got the email saying you were available to promote it, I'm like, all right, it's an athlete playing music. It's not a musician. That is not the case at all. It is full on rock star. It's outstanding. I shot it over to I'm sure you're familiar with AWOL Nation and those guys in the alt rock scene. I shot it over to them. They're like, holy shit, this is like music, you know? So how long did it take you to like start to finish? Like you have the concept, I want to put out my own album through its release a couple months back.
Well, it started when I retired. So 2018, I kind of got the bug and I said, I've never really written songs except for kids songs. I'd go to an elementary school or a hospital and I'd whip out a little song, for the kids or whatever, but never really tried my hand too much at writing a serious songs. And so I started here in Cincinnati. I went out to LA. I grabbed some riffs from the guys' old iPhones. And we had always said for 20 years, we were going to make an album. These are a bunch of guys that I started playing at the Hot Stove Cool Music with back in the early 2000s. And so I started writing songs. It took me about 1.5 years to write 24 songs. I was just figuring out that process. And once I figured out kind of a process where I could write with one other writer, in about 4 hours, I'd have kind of these junky demos. So I assembled all these demos, took them out to LA. The guy said, man, you really been working hard. Okay, let's try to make a record. And so we went out and we really only put about, I'd say we were only in the studio for maybe 4 weeks banging that thing out. But COVID happened right in the middle of that. So there was like a year of dead time before I got back out to finish the record, but it wasn't a lot of time in the studio. We knew what we wanted to do. I didn't know exactly what it was going to sound like, but I was going to let the guys, kind of bring their own flavor to it with the guitars and stuff. And I was just happy to have these stories that were mine, that came out of my own brain and have them come to life on a record. And I wasn't even sure I was going to put it out. That wasn't really the goal. The goal was just to make it and see what we thought about it. But after listening back to it, it was like, man, this is really good. It's like, we're going to have to do something with it. So we figured we'd just put it out.
Nice. It's outstanding. It's like I said, it's a breath of fresh air, bringing back that music that you don't really see created often anymore. I think like, I don't think there's much good music out there today, unless you really, really dig for it, especially what's pushed by studios and what's deemed successful commercially. So as we wrap up here, I just have a couple of rapid fire questions for you, both on the music and baseball as a whole. Just first thing that comes to your mind, thoughts on the pitch clock?
I love it.
Love it. Well, how would you have done with that?
I was a quick guy by nature, man. I really didn't keep the pace up unless I was getting my butt kicked. I would have enjoyed it.
The toughest out for a major leaguer you've ever faced? It could be anybody, some scrappy utility guy, Barry Bonds himself, it doesn't matter. Sin
Shu Chu was the guy that wouldn't come off the top of the head, but just destroyed me. But as a whole, man, Albert Pujols was an absolute monster to deal with.
Shu could rake for a while. He could rake.
Yeah, he could hit, man. It was such a joke that when he got traded over to the Reds in 2013, I think he played with us, man. He walked in the locker room. He walked straight over to me the first day of spring. He just gives me a hug, lays his head on my shoulder, and said, "I'm sorry, Bronson."
That's great.
Why do the White Sox completely stink? Oh man, I haven't seen a lot of White Sox games, but honestly, in years, if I'm just guessing from outside, it's always usually starting pitching, man. I mean, if you're not usually getting the job done, a lot like the Orioles haven't for a lot of years, it's usually that they just don't have enough depth in that starting rotation.
They could use you right now. They have no depth in the starting rotation. We already talked about AJ. Favorite band of all time?
It's Pearl Jam for sure.
Pearl Jam. And
who are you listening to right now? Anybody new?
Yeah, I tell you what, man, I've been grinding for the last 4 days, man, since that Ed Sheeran record came out, man. The quiet one is called Subtract. It's got a lot of gut-wrenching kind of ballads on it, man. But he's writing. I find it very fascinating. I love the Lumineers as well. And the Lumineers do the same thing. They write a ton of great melodies over the same chord progressions. And Ed did this on this record. And I think some of the chords came from Aaron Dessner from the National, but just to be able to break out of the mold and hear the same, FCG over and over again and find different ways to make it melodic and beautiful in a separate song, very difficult for me to do. And I've really enjoyed that lately.
Person you'd like to get a beer with, dead or alive? Could be anybody, president.
Anybody dead or alive. I'd probably take a beer with Gandhi.
It'd be a good one.
Yeah, I don't know if he's a beer drinker, but maybe he'd have a little wine.
And how long did it take you to finally nail the Bard F chord. It's the biggest asshole on earth. I hate that thing more than anything.
Yeah, I don't remember how long it took me, but it was probably the better part of a full year, you know. And you know what I find though, by trying to teach some ball players as you know, it was getting later in my career, the right hand is what everybody has trouble with though. Like we all know how hard it is to make chord shapes, but once you get that, there's still a significant amount of the population who don't understand how rhythm works with the right hand. And they're always asking how many times I'll go up and down. And I used to say, I don't really know. It's like, you just got to feel the song, man. Like it's like playing drums. You got to be able to kind of keep that time. And some of the guys, man, it's really hard. David Ross and Kristen Orphy used to come by my place in Arizona, and I try to get them going, and they could only literally play a song for about 45 seconds, and their right arm would just be wore out because they were having a hard time kind of loosely strumming the guitar. So it's you know, everybody's kind of a little different.
How many have you given? Can anybody credit you for learning the guitar? Actually learning it, not just teaching a few chord shapes.
I don't think so. Most of the guys that you know, you try to teach a little bit, they usually put it down. It takes a little bit of kind of an extra oomph to really dig into the guitar long enough to really get it and pop back out the other side and say, oh man, look what I learned. You know, this is almost like it's got to hit you the right way. And a lot of guys, for them, it's okay, and then they just put it down and they don't really kind of get over the hump.
And as we wrap up, where can we find your music? Are you guys going on tour? Are you in the middle of a tour? Talk to me about.
We played some shows earlier in the year at Innings Festival, and we played the Hot Stove Cool Music. We played a whole set in front of those guys from the 2013 team the other night. We've got
how awesome was that Innings Festival?
Oh man, it's great. It's you know how cool it is to stand on the stage and be playing these songs of my own, and I look out and see Tommy Herr and Edwin Encarnacion hitting in the batting cages on the backside. Man, it's like just absolutely what a cool environment to be in, to see some of my childhood heroes and also play music.
Such a genius idea, like whoever came up with it. Is that something you're going to be a part of like yearly?
Yeah, I think so. It's something that's so kind of it's right up my alley. You know, Jake Peavy loves to show up to it. Bernie Williams likes to go. I mean, it's nothing like, you know, I played my set, man. And as soon as we finish, I look over, the Breeders start their set. And it's like, where in the world is Bronson Arroyo going to see Tommy Herr, Edwin Encarnacion, and the Breeders playing right after my set? You know, it's just amazing.
PV and wait, who else did you name? PV and and Bernie. They're both big time guitarists too, right?
Bernie is a really, really classically trained jazz guy who's been nominated for Grammys, and he's serious about his craft. And Jake is kind of like me, a guy who kind of hacked his way through it, but the music is so under his skin that you can't let it go, you know, and he just enjoys getting up on stage and performing.
Well, thank you. One last time before we get out of here. The album is called Some Might Say. It was released in February, correct?
Yeah, you can catch it on you can find it anywhere on where you find your music, whether it's iTunes or Spotify, Apple Music, wherever it is. And if you want to, I think there's still some signed copies at talkshop.live. That's where you can find an actual CD, or you can go to Amazon. They're on Amazon as well.
Awesome. Yeah, if you're looking for some non-Pearl Jam influenced jams, I know that was a tongue twister. Check it out. That's all over the internet. Bronson, thanks for hopping on, and we'll catch you soon, brother. Keep rocking out.
Appreciate it.
Bronson.